Welcome everybody. I'm here from Trieste, glad to announce the launch of this parallel track of the European Conference of Science Journalism with a host who's a friend from Egypt. She's Pakinam Amer. She is a former journalist or maybe still a journalist part-time who attended, like I did, the night science journalism program at the MIT in Boston. And she learned a lot of things about how virtual reality can increase the quality of journalism. And so she will tell us how she moved from general assignment reporter to science journalist to now part-time researcher at the MIT. Please, Pakinam, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So still a journalist, Fabio, have been for 16 years, and I don't think I'm stopping anytime soon, which I'm not sure is good or bad, but I'm sort of chained to the virtual newsroom. So for those who have no idea who I am, I'm Pakinam Amer. I'm a science journalist based out of Egypt. I haven't always been a science journalist. I started covering conflict and current affairs and the Middle East before switching to science journalism about 7 years ago, and I never looked back. And today, I wanted to talk to you about my own personal journey, stumbling through virtual worlds, augmented reality, virtual reality, and using emerging technology to try and tell better stories. As Fabio has said, I've been very lucky to be able to pursue that kind of thinking and sort of create prototypes and small adventures and storytelling by joining the Night Science Journalism program. Shout out to ECSJ for giving me amazing opportunities in 2018 and 2019, which enabled me to later on join the MIT Center for Advanced Virtuality as a research affiliate. So I'm still telling stories. I'm still using, normal text narratives because this is where I come from. I was a print journalist before I became an online journalist. And this is the medium that I have been dealing with for years, words. And I personally arrived at AR and VR in emerging tech through experiencing award-winning virtual experiences, things like A Fistful of Stars, which explores space through the POV of the Hubble telescope, experiences like Tree, where you're embodied in a rainforest tree and you grow up from a seed to become a full-blown tree and experience different life cycles before the tree is cut down. So these experiences, I've had access to them through science festivals, science and film festivals, and I found that they kind of intersected beautifully, at a point between science and storytelling. And I was very intrigued by the technology itself and very impressed by it. But I was also intrigued by the claim that virtuality is the ultimate empathy machine. The first time I heard that was during a TED Talk by Chris Milk, who is the CEO of Within, which is one of the biggest producers of virtual reality experiences right now. If you own an Oculus Go or an Oculus Quest, you will find an app called Within and you could access all the experiences that they have. And at the time he was talking about an experience called Clouds over Sidra, which took users inside refugee camp in a VR experience that was, looking at it right now, it's closer to 360 video experiences that we see in New York Times VR platforms than more immersive VR, VR, which I came to study later on. So I spent about 6 years at Springer Nature telling big science stories. I was chief editor of Nature Middle East, which is the regional copy of Nature magazine. I was seeing tons of narratives and tons of stories. I was assigning them, writing them, editing them. I worked with amazing storytellers. I was able to launch a podcast. I'm still a podcaster. In fact, I just published a podcast with Nature Careers, directed at scientists on how to be better science communicators. So I still use these mediums, voice and text. And, I'm proud to have done all that. But I was always looking for ways to engage audiences in more visceral way. I loved engaging my audience through sound, and it felt like a much more intimate experience. The audience was hearing my voice, and there is a strong element of production there and a sense of presence. And I loved experimenting with that. I still love doing it. But the urge to get closer to my audience is what brought me to emerging tech and brought me to AI and VR as alternative ways of telling my stories, of expanding my, tools as a storyteller. So more than ever, and especially during the coronavirus, I've recognized that need for intimacy and closeness, not just with audience, but with everyone. And I think that more than ever, we will see more expansions and more development in these types of technologies. And we might, in the future, maybe a decade from now, maybe 2 decades from now, we will depend a lot on them. This is how I see it, at least, that we will depend a lot on them in telling a lot of our stories. And so as a journalist who comes from a very traditional background, like maybe some people in the audience, I'm not advocating for, leaving the traditional tools behind and embracing technology altogether, but to recognizing that there are affordances and there are things that you can do with that technology that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do with text or voice or video alone. And this is where we can explore and play and experiment as storytellers and as people who are not being represented in that media, because the media is currently dominated by game engines and game designers and gamers and the porn industry. And there is very little middle ground and for other storytellers, except for, festival experiences and narratives that are more fiction-like or that are more centered around the technology itself as opposed to story. And the technology is very impressive if you've tried it, especially if you've tried like I said, experiences like Spheres or A Fistful of Stars, and in and of itself, it's amazing. But what I noticed personally as a journalist, that there was a lack of content. There were a lot of platforms, a lot of headsets, a lot of interfaces in which we can communicate content, but the content that I desire personally as a storyteller, someone who loves long form narratives, or someone who wants to learn more about the world is very scarce. So 2 years ago, I went on a journey of narrative exploration that took me to MIT and Harvard as a Knight Fellow. And like I said, afterwards, as a research affiliate. And I spent my entire fellowship sort of asking these questions about the ethics of the technology, about how it's used, what kind of platforms are there, and until I finally landed on the big picture of what I wanted to do. So let me share with you some slides that might help you visualize, this journey and the type of stuff that I created while I was on it. I've been advised to stop my video when I'm sharing the screen, but I'm not sure if are we okay? Can I continue having the video, or do you want me to stop it? Anyone experiencing any problems with the connection?
That's okay. That's okay. You should be fine in video.
Okay, great. So I'll just, I'll start my presentation. I'm not sure, can you guys see my screen? Fabio, can you see it?
Yes, we see the PowerPoint.
Okay, cool. All right. Sorry, so I'm quite versed in a lot of platforms related to VR and emerging technology, but not PowerPoint. So apologies in advance, if I make very, very rookie and dumb mistakes. So basically, this is me trying to fit in with, in places where I don't fit in, and that kind of defines my journey as a journalist as a whole. So like I said, this journey took me to MIT, where, I slept in XR and VR labs, I breathed those things and those technologies, lived and breathed them for throughout one year. I experimented with various technologies. I entered myself into hackathons. I took I took myself out of my comfort zone as a storyteller and as a journalist because I wanted to experience other ways of designing narratives and story, from game design, role-playing games, to taking courses that, chart the skies, and, that took me to on boat trips into the ocean to kind of, map the world around me. And of course, VR and AR and this type of immersive reality. So one of the experiences that the experience that I'm going to take you through now is the experience that I ended up doing at my end, at my final project for one of the classes at MIT. So this experience is basically a big physics thing, and this is merely a prototype. Basically, a minimal form of what this experience could look or feel like. So I wanted to introduce people to the Higgs field, which is a field of energy that permeates all of space and is the home of a fundamental particle, the Higgs particle, that interacts with all others. And I wanted users to have a relationship with this field, because this is something that you can't do with normal type storytelling. And this is where I thought immersion and the sense of presence that VR can afford can give me beyond other tools of storytelling. So I wanted to experiment with that. If the Higgs field and boson were a little less sticky, the universe would fly away. All the particles, they're all gone. You're all alone. You're in the empty. If the Higgs known particles were too heavy, the universe would be crushed and atoms wouldn't exist. I mean, the entire reality as we know it wouldn't exist. So what I loved about the idea of extended realities or virtual realities is that they can express all these states, the vastness of the universe or the claustrophobia, of having a crushed universe. And it can give us a peek into, micro worlds, macro worlds, and unseen worlds, things that we cannot usually visualize in our normal lives. And I was also intrigued by the idea that not only can you be present in those worlds that are more magical than real because of the fact that, they're simulated and visualized, using some data and some information, but they're not, 100% accurate, not in terms of science, but in terms of reality. So you can be present, but there is also another dimension to that presence. You could have interaction. You could actually interact with the world around you. You could, respond to it. You could react to it, and it reacts to you. So I didn't just want people to see. I wanted people to be there in every sense of the word. So let me give you a taste of the Higgs field by playing this video. So this is the Higgs field as I chose to visualize it in abstract terms. So this is, like I said, this is my, one of the final prototype that I did as a Knight Science Fellow before I moved to the Center for Advanced Virtuality, where I worked on projects that are more related to AI. And this is the second scene of the experience and the user's first encounter with the Higgs field, or a reimagination of the Higgs field, if you will. And I'm going to tell you how I got there. So I wanted to create an experience that makes this invisible world a little bit more tangible, where the user can dive in this micro world, can see the particles that represent, the building blocks of life as we know it. And I wanted to educate users about these atoms, the idea of the birth of mass, and the elementary particles that make up matter, and, that invisible fluid that is holding them together and that is affecting their masses. And since mass is a property of all things, I thought that the narrative should focus on the Higgs boson, especially that, in our minds, it has been this magical particle, the God particle, associated with a lot of mysteries, but also associated with a lot of money being thrown in research, it's a multi-million-dollar enterprise, Actually, it's arguably the most expensive physics experiment in the whole world. So I wanted to tie this together as a science storyteller. We're putting money in this experiment. We keep hearing about the Higgs boson. So what is it? Why is it important? And, and what role has it played in the creation of the universe as we know it today. But I also wanted to create a magical layer to it. I didn't want it to be a simulation that, I took off, CERN's website and put there in VR or in 3D dimensional worlds. I wanted to create a sense of wonder and fantasy that is hidden inside this complex, world, but that is also hidden inside a field like physics, which, as it happened, is my undergrad major before I switched to journalism. So as a journalist, I also felt that, I have a fresh perspective on science, discovering science in a whole new ways that, that are different from the way that I discover science through talking to scientists, over a podcast or, over the phone for a story. So how is this connected to the idea of empathy that I started with? Why would I want to create empathy for particles? So I'm sort of making through these experiences, I'm making the case, or I'm experimenting with the case that sometimes one may not fully understand a concept in science, something like the Higgs, without being part of it or without interacting with it in some meaningful form. And I think this is virtuality comes in, and this is where my experimentation with it came in. I'll get into more detail about how I created this experience, like the technical aspects. But for now, I'll circle back to the empathy machine and, this quote by Chris Milk, the entrepreneur and immersive artist who created Within. So at the time, VR, has been making a comeback, but we were not so familiar with it as we are now. Now we have more headsets than ever. Every other person, that I know has had, has a VR headset, has had, of course, but also VR headset, whether they use it for gaming or general entertainment. It's becoming more pervasive than ever, especially in certain circles and among, younger audiences. So in that TED Talk, Chris Milk talked about the idea of, living the story by being part of it, by being where the action happens, whether it's a refugee camp in Turkey, whether it's a tsunami in Asia, whether it's a rover on Mars, we can be part of the story by being there. He talked about concepts like presence, immersion, engagement, or holding power of a medium, which have for years after defined, the jargon and, that we use to talk about this virtual world. It was interesting for me because in journalism school, we always talked about the idea of proximity. An earthquake happening in Cairo, Egypt, where I'm from, is very different from an earthquake happening in Los Angeles on the other side of the world. Proximity brings people closer to the story and makes the story more important. So VR creators now promises that the story will not just be in our proximity, it might even happen to us. Basically, the war coming to your living room, the White Walkers from Game of Thrones, you could now, battle them in your own bedroom. So this should make sense, right? Proximity should bring us closer and should bring, an element of satisfaction and immersion, right? Well, in my experience, not always. So this is from Clouds Over Sidra. It's a 2015 VR experience taking place inside the Zaatari refugee camp in Jordan, which is home to over 80,000 Syrian refugees. I'm not sure if anybody has seen this, but it was a great experiment, and as VR experience or user experience is another term that sometimes we use for users. You get to walk through the camp, without guides, and there is no one there to tell you where to look. There is 6 degrees of freedom as opposed to 3 degrees of freedom. So in VR, 6 degrees of freedom is where you could, look in all directions, up and down. You could also walk through the experience. 3 degrees of freedom is more limited, but in this experience, you had 6 degrees of freedom. You could walk around, move freely in every direction in 3-dimensional space, and you have freedom of movement. So there's certainly proximity. You're literally there. But you're also suspending this belief, and you're pretending that this was not heavily produced, that boundaries don't exist, that if you choose to, you can go whatever you want. To use VR jargon, you pretend that you're not using an interface. You're pretending that the experience is not mediated. So it doesn't, this experience, unlike other experiences about war, does not showcase traumas. It's not a trauma safari, and it's not graphic in any form or shape. But it make me wonder, does putting you there change your perspective about anything? Does the fact that you're there sitting with the people in the refugee camp, does it, even if as we trace, even as we erase all traces of mediation from the experience, does it really bring you closer to the conflict? After you take your headset off and come out of the experience, are you a changed person? I personally couldn't know, but I would, from my own experience and from the experience of people that I talk to, that sometimes the change in perspective is momentary. And sometimes in the absence of context, you really cannot make your mind about something beyond what you see in the here and now. So I wanted to figure out, so do bringing people closer to something like that make them change the way that they look at it? So do we only need proximity, or does it have to be proximity with meaning and with context? So before I started delving into these questions and trying to create the perfect VR experiences, because it's really easy to kind of sit back as a journalist and critique all the VR experiences out there if you don't have your hands dirty and you're not actually making this stuff. So I realized I actually need to kind of jump in and experiment with this form of storytelling, before I can, open, from it. I did not want to open from a distance, basically. I wanted to try and see whatever worked in my head, whatever theory I had about, the perfect story telling techniques in this medium would hold up water. So in order to do that, I needed to kind of step back and relearn two mediums that are intimately connecting. First, VR and how to create in VR platforms, so virtuality and game design. My first, sorry. Okay. So I'm gonna play a clip from my first experience, my first prototype, VR prototype that I did at MIT. It's my classmates and I jokingly call it dystopian supermarket because that began as a working name and then it stuck. And so here it is. So the setting is a supermarket, a mundane environment in which the user plays an escape room style game. So let me see if I can turn on the sound so you can hear it. Sorry. I don't know why my sound is not working. All right. So the setting is a supermarket, a mundane environment. And it's like it's inspired by, escape room style games. And it takes place in an indefined dystopian future, and the idea is that the user navigates a hostile environment and they have to make a set of decisions and they have to escape their current predicament. But in order to do that, they have to make the right decisions as opposed to the more intuitive decisions. And the whole experience had no narrative whatsoever. It was only gameplay. And I really wanted to start from there, from the other extreme of where I was as a storyteller. And I was trying to create parallels between this, and climate change. So this game, believe it or not, was an allegorical representation of climate change worst case scenario. So what we did is that, you create an experience, you test it, you iterate, you take users' feedback. But unfortunately, the parallels between gameplay and reality wasn't clear to many players or users, and no one immediately came out of the game, making the connection between this and climate change. So as a storyteller, I felt that I had no control inside the virtual space once the user put the headset on, and so it's all gameplay. I gave the user complete agency over the world around them, and I couldn't immediately tell if this was good or bad, but it did not feel right for me as a storyteller. So I worked on another project where I was trying to look more deeply at, how we connect to objects, but also I wanted to experiment with something that is, somewhere between gameplay and narrative. And this is a project that I did, was conceptualized by another Knight Fellow, and I was part of a team that did it, for a hackathon, I think it was a 3-day hackathon that brought people from MIT, Harvard, Stanford, Microsoft, all the geeks and nerds, which I'm proud to be one of. So it brought together all these people, and you form teams, and you start, and you don't even have to have any experience in VR or any type of technology. It's just you have to have the interest in, you have to want to tell a story or create an application or a service that is, beneficial from your perspective. So we created this, this prototype for an experience where you get to experience firsthand the first sketches that we know of neurons, the first accurate sketches of brain neuron by Santiago Ramon y Cajal. And he was the first person, he was the first scientist to recognize the complexities of the neuron. And my team and I used his drawings to create 3D replicas of 3D replica models of neurons as he envisioned them. And in this experience, you start in a lab and tumble down a microscope into Cajal's world of neurons and into the brain as he envisioned it. So, and in addition to the VR part, we also envisioned an AR component that is made in Vuforia, which is another development platform for engine for AR. And we wanted this AR, part to be a companion to a book that that contains the work of Cajal. So basically create an AR storybook, that you could, that when you open the actual physical book, you can point any device, your smartphone, any smart device, your smartphone or your tablet, to the neurons, and they would, you could be able to see them in 3D space and, move around them and sort of explore them better, making them more tangible. This experience taught me a lot about telling story, especially about layering my story in a medium like VR, and making the user, working with the user to uncover these layers of narratives and story through interactions. So I'm going to show you, I'm just going to hit play here, and so you could get a taste of the experience through the trailer, and then we can talk about layers. Hopefully my internet doesn't fail me. Okay. So this experience was also my first dive into the idea of 3D modeling, and sort of painting or drawing or writing in 3D space, which was really interesting, and which later on propelled me to take a deeper dive into three-dimensional modeling. But I have not done that. That butterfly is definitely not mine. I was not that good. So this is the experience. So it begins with a setting where, you're experiencing, something that looked like the lab where Santiago Ramon y Cajal worked. You jump, you tumble through the microscope. You cannot see every single neuron that's there. You have to uncover some of the neurons. And as you uncover them, you also uncover layers of text and layers of story. So as storytellers, I felt that, in this type of experience, we were present. Next in line, I wanted to, play a bit with other forms of 3D narratives and projection. Sorry, how do I get out of this?
Pakinam, we are a bit late, so please just a couple of minutes, a few minutes, if you can wrap up.
Sorry. Okay, I don't know how to.
It is definitely fascinating.
So I'll jump out of it. I think I should have timed it better. So just to give you a quick overview, I experimented with 3D holographs. I experimented with things like, a form of immersive filmmaking where you could literally, scan people into VR experiencing. This is called volumetric filmmaking. You can scan people and things. And basically I experimented with things like, creating 3D objects. This is part of, the experience that I created about the Higgs boson. Sorry, I'm gonna have to jump through it, which also had a lot of interactivity at the end. There is a sense of play, there is a sandbox for users to kind of experiment with the medium, to kind of create collisions as if they're inside the Large Hadron Collider, and to experiment with speed and presence, and to kind of know the Higgs boson better as they're guided by my narratives. So these are all, sketches from, 3D modeling, which and game engines, where I used to design, VR experiences in collaboration with, developers, in collaboration with artists, and with the guidance of, my professors at MIT. So what did I learn from this experience? I don't think that I stopped learning per se, in the sense that I still have not found the perfect story to tell in VR. I'm still experimenting. I'm still knowing more about the audience, what they need, because the audience in VR and AR is very different from the audience that we're used to in other forms of medium. So, but I learned that we can still, as journalists, that we could use this medium as a companion to, a bigger story, as a companion to, other forms of storytelling, and as a means of visualization. I learned that not every single story should be told in VR, that we should not focus on the technology itself, that we should focus on content and story, and that the narrative should be the one driving the technology. The narrative should be the one at the steering wheel. And for me, the ideal experience was a mix of story and gameplay. So another experience that I did at MIT, I'm just going to go through it very quickly, that I collaborated with as part of a huge team, I only did a small part, was in the event of Moon Disaster, which is an AI-based experience. And basically at the heart of this installment or experience is a deepfake film that basically reimagines the history of the moon landing. And deepfakes were, all the rage before coronavirus emerged, and this has became what we all talked about. But, but there was a lot of concerns and anxiety recently about deepfakes, and this fictional narrative wanted to demonstrate the effects and, the range of the technology, but also create conversations around, this computing technology, what it means, its impact on minorities, its impact on women, and, its impact on the on even visuals and video as means of testimony, and and meditation, and it's also to meditate on the idea of truth and testimony. So it had an element of documentary to it. There was filmmaking, was a video at the heart of it, but it was it was made dependent on creating a video that visualizes a different reality using a machine learning tech called deepfake, which is AI powered. So the film we created later became a full installation, and now there is a digital version for it. And, on my Twitter, I'm going to share all the links, that you need to have. And that was another example of a way in which we could, put something out there that is pure technology, create an entire narrative around it to create context, and to kind of explain the technology to people, and to create discourses around this technology. So again, like I said, using a tech not just for the sake of tech, but as part of a bigger story, and as a way to visualize or demonstrate a point in that story. Finally, let me just. So this is the video of actually, we used a speech that was written for Nixon in case, the moon landing failed and was never given. And we created a video that mimicked, that looked like Nixon was actually giving that speech, in which, the moon landing ended in disaster. And I invite you to see the digital version of the story. Very quickly, there are, you don't have to kind of take a deep dive and, travel to the other side of the world in order to learn VR. There are already, platforms out there that you could use in order to play with AI and VR and, explore their capabilities and affordances. Reach.love is one example of that. It's a volumetric platform that is created by journalists for journalists in order to create VR experiences or VR clips or, very limited and, very small prototypes, using simple code and using, pre-made assets and open source assets. And you could visualize it using a simple headset. This is something called Runway ML, which is an AI model training platform. And this is an example of a detection model that I was training and annotating, just to demonstrate it to you. And it's easy to use and it has a lot of presets. And although you can't work with large data sets yet, it's a good place to start if you want to explore or wrap your head around, machine learning, how training model works, and how you can perhaps create generative models that you could use as part of your stories. Before I wrap up, I just like to remind you that there are a lot of resources out there. There are fellowships, internships, festivals where you can experience VR, and AR experiences and AI-based experiences just to get, just to test the waters and get a taste of what's stand, in regards to that. There are conferences like the one that you're attending right now where people are talking about their personal experiences or giving workshops on how, to train data or how to, 3D model, or, use game engines to create simple VR experiences or simple gameplays. There are online courses and YouTube University, which I depended on a lot, even as, part of even as part of MIT, my colleagues there depended on it. There are so many tutorials out there. You can start experimenting by pitching ideas to editor. I know it's now it's more difficult than ever because of COVID, but in the very, once we're sort of climbing out of this, we can always play with other forms of narratives, and we could find, perhaps ways to raise awareness about, the health aspects of, of COVID-19, or perhaps, the more esoteric aspects of, the virus, and explore what it is through simulated words and through, visualizing using VR experiences. And that's it. And I'm so sorry I had to rush you through that last part. But I timed it for a little longer. I'm so sorry, but I really hope that some of what I said was at least useful to you.
Thank you very much.
Twitter hashtag is Pakinam Amer, my last name, and you can ask me any questions that you want over Twitter.
Yeah, unfortunately, I let you speak because I like the presentation, and I didn't want to be rude with a kind friend who was presenting very interesting stuff. But there is no time, unfortunately, now for questions, but we will publish on the website of the conference all the contact details of Pakinam Amer. I see that the next speaker is already here. So I want to thank Pakinam a lot for being with us today.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
And